This is Myra Elaine from the Buying Space Channel. I continue my series on the four Gospels, which are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm in Mark chapter 14. Starting in verse 53. They took Jesus to the high priest's home, where the leading priests, the elders, and the teachers of religious law had gathered. Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance and went right into the high priest's courtyard. There he sat with the guards, warming himself by the fire. Inside, the leading priests and the entire high council were trying to find evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. But they couldn't find any. Many false witnesses spoke against him, but they contradicted each other. Finally, some men stood up and gave this false testimony. We heard him saying, "I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days I will build another, made without human hands." But even then, they didn't get the story straight. Then the high priest stood up before the others and asked Jesus, "Well, aren't you going to answer these charges? What do you have to say for yourself?" But Jesus was silent and made no reply. And the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus said, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand, and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothing and showed his horror and said, "Why do we need other witnesses? You have all heard this blasphemy. What is your verdict?" "Guilty," they all cried. "He deserves to die." Then some of them began to spit on him, and they blindfolded him and beat him with their fists. "Prophesy to us," they jeered, and the guards slapped him as they took him away. How horrifying that our Lord Jesus Christ was treated in this manner. But what did Jesus say later? He said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." These people did not know who Jesus Christ was. They didn't understand it. And if you see somebody do something horrific, leave it in God's hands. It is not ours to decide the fate of these people that did this, or their descendants, or their nation, or their religion, or their ethnic identification. We are not, as Christians, to hate the Jews, even though they did this to Jesus. Jesus was a Jew. The 12 tribes' names will be on the slabs of heaven and on the gates. Let us not hate. Let us love one another. That's the reason Christ died. He went through all this and died and rose again, so there could be peace and love. not war and hate. Let's love one another. God has forgiven all of us. All we have to do is confess. He is there for us. He is there for these people in their lifetime to have confessed. It is their judgment by God, not by us, that will count. So even though it's hard for me to read this, hard to know what Jesus went through, I will not hate on anyone for it, because all of this was part of God's plan. You know, Joseph and the coat of many colors, his brothers sold him into slavery. And after he was sold into slavery and he was reunited with them, he forgave them, because he said to them that it was all part of God's plan, so they all wouldn't die. Because if Joseph hadn't gone to Egypt and met Pharaoh and stored up the grain during the years the prosperous years, during the years of famine, the Israelites would have died. Jesus would have never existed. I don't know that Joseph knew about Jesus, but he did know that his people would have died. And most of Egypt and the surrounding countryside, people would have perished. There would have been massive starvation if he hadn't gone to Egypt. So he had to go through that, and he forgave his brothers for what they'd done to him. And Jesus forgives us all. He died for us. He made the ultimate sacrifice. So let's not judge anyone involved, not even Judas Iscariot. He was there for a purpose. These things, these events had to happen. I know it's deep and it's a lot to think about, but just leave it to God. Have a wonderful and blessed day, everyone.